In this lesson we're going to get started with our project, and we're going to have a look at installing the qix-faker library, which is a library for generating hypercubes for testing purposes. And that is what we're going to be using just to get familiar with using hypercubes and to also build out our project. So when our project is complete, it's going to look something like this. So extremely simple, and we got some text and data from our hypercube being returned. And we've got the ability to actually click this button and cycle through our hypercube. So it's extremely, simple and basic, but we'll introduce you to some really important React fundamentals before we move on to our next project. So that's what we're going to be building, and I'm just going to close this and we can get started. So if you open Code Sandbox, I'm going to create a new sandbox. And we're going to use the React template. And when this loads, you should now be familiar with this structure. So we've got our index.js with our React DOM render method, and app.js is our kind of base component in our React project. So I'm going to just remove this code on lines 7 and 8. And the first thing we want to do is to actually add a dependency. And we're going to add this qix-faker library to our project. So I'll provide the link to this in the lesson description. And this library is used for generating fake click engine data in the shape of hypercubes and list objects. So it's great for prototyping. So it's not always convenient to connect to a click engine, which is why this is great for prototyping and also during the development phase of your project. So here's the information on the usage. So we need to npm install the library, and then this is how we use it. So we're importing hypercube and list object here, and then we're using this hypercube method to create a hypercube with 3 rows, 1 dimension and 1 measure. So let's have a go at doing that ourselves. So in Code Sandbox, to add a dependency, we can just do that here. So we don't need to npm install anything. We just search for our dependency and add it. So let's search for qix-faker, and we can select, and that is now added as a dependency to our project. So I'm going to create a new file here called hypercube.jsx, and I'm just going to take this code from this GitHub page. So at the top we're requiring from the qix-faker library a hypercube and list object, so we can actually change this to import from. So we saw that in the previous section that we can just use the import syntax, so it's a little bit easier. Notice these curly braces. So what we're doing is actually destructuring this object on imports. There'll be more on this in a couple of lessons time. We're actually going to focus on object destructuring. And we don't need this list object, we're just using the hypercube. So we are generating a dimension and a measure, and this hypercube is going to contain 3 rows. I'll just increase this to 10, and then we can export it. So export default HC. And in app.js, let's import the component from hypercube, and I'm just going to add a console log here. So if you remember how to do that, we need the curly braces, and we can console log HC. Okay, so in our console now, you can see we have an object being returned, which is our hypercube. So I'm going to open this in a new window, and let's open our developer tools. and you can see that object. So we've got our hypercube object. So a few things to note. qDataPages contains our data, which we'll look into in a minute. qDimensionInfo has got some information on our dimension, so our dimension title, some other attributes here. qMeasureInfo, information on our measure, so there's only one measure and one dimension, which is why we both have an array of 1. Obviously the more measures you add, the more measure info this array will increase. We've got a property here for sort order and qsize. So as we know, our hypercube has got 10 rows and 1 dimension and 1 measure. So that's why the sizes of qcy of 10 and qcx of 2. And let's look into qDataPages. So again, this is an array. And if we look into this array, we've got 3 objects, so qArea, qMatrix, and qTails. So I'm just going to focus on qMatrix just to talk you through. And this has got our data. So all of the data being returned from our hypercube is in this object. So we can have a look at the first one, and you've got our dimension qtext value of bike. And the measure here of $765. The second entry, we've got dimension value of cheese and the value of $1,808. So this is the data array which we're going to be using and grabbing this data from in our application. So that's all for this lesson. What we've done is that we've used the qix-faker library just to load a fake hypercube that we're going to be using in this project, and you've had a first look at an actual hypercube in the console and just got a little bit familiar with this structure. And we'll obviously be using hypercubes plenty during this course, so you're going to get very used to how this is all laid out. So in the next lesson we're going to move on to look at React props and just recover that important concept.